Western North Carolina is somewhat unique by the way we're situationed, tucked away adjacent to North Georgia and Eastern Tennessee. And as you look at the movement of goods and services and employment centers, there's a real strong association with our western counties with the economies and the transportation networks of North Georgia and East Tennessee. The Appalachian Regional Development Act is what we're talking about and how it impacts western North Carolina. It really goes back to the concepts of post-World War II about transportation and how it affects the country. They came back from World War II with the concept of creating a new highway and transportation network called the Eisenhower Interstate System. And as it developed in the 1950s, the routes, then there was a concern about the Appalachian region and how it could connect to that interstate system given its mountainous terrain and isolationism. So Congress in 1965 passed the Appalachian Regional Development Act and defined a 13-state Appalachian region. It set up the structure was that the governor of each state would belong to the commission and there would be a presidential appointment. The mission of the act, passed in 65, was to increase job opportunities in Appalachia, strengthen the capacity of the people to compete in a new global economy, and develop infrastructure with a focus on water, sewer, and transportation. And the transportation piece of it was pulled out and a specific ADHS or Appalachian Development Highway System was designated. The two major components or emphasis areas of the Act were economic development, and that was in infrastructure like water and sewer, education, health, telecommunications, tourism, and energy. And then as part of that, the big component again was the Appalachian Development Highway System to provide access into the area for jobs and hopefully prosper all the other elements of the program. The purpose of the Appalachian Development Highway System, again, just close those gaps that were noted when they developed the Eisenhower network and open areas of recreation, which we feel like we've got lots of opportunities in western North Carolina, and to establish commuter routes, provide access to the commercial centers. This is a map that shows the corridors that were selected by the ADHS Commission, Appalachian Regional Commission, and it shows where these corridors have been implemented and where there are remaining segments to be constructed. There have been about 2,500 miles of the network already completed. We're enjoying those today in western North Carolina, and they have helped to bring prosperity to western North Carolina. But there is about a 600-mile portion to be complete for the ADHS system in the nation. Western North Carolina had 4 designated corridors. They were called Corridor A, Corridor B, Corridor W, and Corridor K. Corridor A connected Asheville to Atlanta. It runs from I-285 north of Atlanta to I-40 near Clyde in North Carolina. Most of this road is a 4-lane divided highway. Most of it you can drive 55 miles an hour. That's the speed limit. And all of it's constructed in North Carolina with the exception of about 7 miles in Clay County just south of Hayesville. Corridor B goes from Asheville, North Carolina in the south to Columbus, Ohio in the north, and is mostly completed it is complete in North Carolina, and it eventually became I-26 from Asheville to Johnson City, Tennessee. It's a 4-lane divided freeway as well, and the speed limit on much of it is 65 miles an hour. Corridor W is our next corridor, and it connects Asheville, North Carolina to Greenville, South Carolina. It's designated US 25 in North Carolina and South Carolina, and it's also a 4-lane divided freeway with a high speed of 60 to 65 mile an hour speed limit. And this corridor was just recently completed 2 years ago. The last corridor I want to speak about is Corridor K, and it's the connection from Asheville to Chattanooga. It's a 128-mile corridor from near Waynesville. It connects Corridor A near Waynesville, North Carolina, and then connects to I-75 in Cleveland, Tennessee. Of the 128 miles, about 84 miles of it runs through the state of North Carolina. And this is the corridor that has the significant portion of incomplete mileage. There is 18 miles that's incomplete in North Carolina. And in Tennessee, there's about 44 miles to complete. The environmental impact statement for Project A9 was actually completed in 1984, and segments of that corridor were worked on and completed. In 1985, it was determined that additional environmental work needed to be done because of the date of the original environmental document, and so the department began refreshing its environmental impact statement done in 1984 and performing additional environmental studies because of the additional environmental concerns. So new studies for sections A, B, and C were initiated in 1995. Section D was evaluated in 1995 and actually has been constructed. And then a decision was made in 1998 to drop Section A out of the environmental document. And the reason was the same reason. We didn't want to repeat ourselves of doing an environmental study that by the time we got around to financing and constructing a project that all the data would need to be refreshed. So it was a collaborative decision to take segment A out and focus on the B, C, and D segments of the projects. And again, D was evaluated and constructed. And so we've been on our focus has been as an agency as to what are the environmental impacts on the segments B and C. As we've performed our evaluations of the environmental impacts, both to the natural and the human environment, we've worked with federal permitting agencies that at the end of the day, after all the environmental documents are completed and the impacts are assessed, they will be asked to issue a permit to proceed with construction. And we've been collaborating with them throughout the evaluation of the environmental impacts. Some of the concerns that we've heard from our partners is it better to use the existing transportation network instead of building a new road? Is it more feasible? Does it still accomplish the same goals to use corridors that are already established and those that you have? The other things we're hearing is with a new 4-lane freeway, the environmental impacts are too high. That it's just going to create too much of an environmental, the damages are not worth the benefits, and trying to quantify those benefits. And then the last concern we're hearing is, if you build a major highway, would it actually damage the economy? The intent of the program was to help the economic chances of our people in this area. But if you build this new road, would the impacts, the visual impacts on the forest, the impacts to the transportation experience, would that actually in turn be a detriment to things like tourism and forest access? So with these questions, DOT felt like, and Federal Highways Administration felt like, that we needed to proceed forward with a visioning statement and to try to determine exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish. And then we can later on then see how the transportation improvements will fit into the vision and the goals of the local community, the region, and the state. So this regional visioning effort was kicked off somewhere around March. I did include in my presentation 2 slides that kind of show what unemployment is regionally and in surrounding counties, and unemployment in the counties that we do have segments of quarter K to complete. And the data does show that traditional unemployment is very high in Graham and Cherokee counties, and then also impacts Swain County, and at times Graham County has the highest unemployment in the state. So one of the things we hear at NCDOT is their unemployment is so bad that their number one export is their young talent, and they feel like completion of this highway is key to overcoming that condition. What's it meant for us? Next slide is the 1951 highway map, NC highway map. As I said earlier, we built a lot of our ADHS network in Western North Carolina, and we've prospered from it. As a citizen of Western North Carolina, I get on these routes very often, at least once a week, to make trips to throughout our region. And if you look at what it's meant to the average citizen, you can just think about how it used to be. In 1960, a trip, if you lived in Murphy and you wanted to go to Asheville, it was only 113 miles along the route, but that 113 miles took you 4 hours. Today, the trip is 8 miles shorter, but your drive time is cut in half. And this is because of the ADHS network we have completed. Another comparison is in Clay County, in Hayesville. If you wanted to go to Asheville in 1960, you had to drive 112 miles and your drive time would be 4 hours. Today, the mileage again isn't that much more, but the drive time there again, you can do it under 2 hours. So we had access before. We had road network before the ADHS network, but it was just crooked and it took a long time. And so we think about people having access to jobs, access to entertainment and recreation. We think about people that maybe live in urban centers having access to our natural resources and coming in to see our scenic tourist spots, and while they're here, maybe eat a meal, spend the night, take in a show, and as you look at that, this travel time and the experience is a critical factor. Um, there are places where people want to get on curvy roads and drive motorcycles in particular, but most of your tourists and your tourist destinations, people wanting to go to Harrah's Casino in Cherokee, or perhaps the new casino that will happen in Murphy, or is supposed to happen, they don't want to get on crooked roads that they can't drive 20, 25 miles an hour, and that 2 hour additional travel time would not have made it possible to have the Harrah's Casino in Cherokee or the proposed one in Murphy. One thing I've not talked about is the ability to ship freight through our region. In 1997, we had a rock slide on I-40, and that was prior to I-26 being completed to Johnson City, Tennessee from Asheville. And in that time frame, we saw a lot of freight routed through the Highway 74 route. A lot of it went across Sam's Gap in Madison County, but a pretty good portion, a noticeable increase was seen in freight traffic. And that's one thing that Western North Carolina lacks, is a redundancy in its network, its freeway network, where if a rock slide happens or a landslide happens, that folks have good choices that don't have heavy impacts on their day-to-day lives. In 1994, Graham County lost all of its primary highways due to a flooding event. And the only two ways into Graham County at that time were across a Forest Service road over Tatum Gap Road, and then a state secondary road on Yellow Branch Road, which has a very steep grade. So access to freight and having freight corridors through our area, it not only allows industry to have an opportunity to come to Western North Carolina, but it also offers a redundancy in the network should there be slides and floods. About 4 years ago, the state decided it would take a new approach to evaluating transportation projects. There are a lot of stated and documented needs in transportation that will go unfunded because the funds are not there to build every project that's been recognized as a need. So this prioritization system was developed as a way to evaluate each project's worth and then apply the financing to the biggest bang for the buck, the most wise choice of the dollars. At that time, or 2 years ago, was our last ranking process, and the A9A project, which is part of Quarter K, was ranked, and it ranked as the highest priority in the statewide mobility category for our region or for our division, and it ranked 46th in the state. Now, this way of evaluating projects and ranking them is being revamped. Again, the emphasis is to try to pick the best project, but this time the best projects are being looked at more from a job creation and economic benefits viewpoint. And we'll see how Quarter K, the A9 project, ranks, and then move forward accordingly. But it's ranked well in the past, and the expectation is that it should rank well in the future. So that's the purpose of the regional visioning effort that's become known as Opt-in, and it began in March of this year, 2013, and hopefully will be finished up around May of 2014. And from that, then we can start looking at how does transportation fit with this local, regional, state, and federal vision.